Hi, I'm Miles Goldsmith, and this is my podcast, Game Design Hour, where I interview the people behind the video games you love. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Shawn Patton. He is the design director behind the VR game I Expect You to Die. Before I get into the interview, I need to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can use the link in the description to head to their website. Stick around until the end of the episode to find out how you can get 20% off your next order. Let's get into the interview. When did you first realize that you wanted to be a video game designer?
I realized I wanted to be a video game designer very early on. So I became intrigued with computers probably around the third grade, to be honest. My dad was a computer scientist, and as soon as I discovered programming, it was like, well, what do you do with this? Of course you want to make games. It was definitely something I was always interested in, throughout even grade school. Whether I realized it could be a career or not, I don't think I realized that then, certainly.
So what were some of the most important lessons you learned while working on some of your first few games?
Probably the importance of feedback to the player, right? So, you can have a cool game, but if people don't know what's going on, if they don't understand if they're doing it well or if they're doing it poorly, then, they're going to be confused. They're not going to have a fun time. They're going to stop playing your game. So I think good feedback to players is key. And I learned that pretty early on.
The title of the game we're talking about, I Expect You to Die, obviously inspired by the James Bond film Goldfinger. Were there any other parts of the game that were inspired from James Bond films or other classic spy films?
Yeah, I think in general, right, we wanted to come up, because when we started working on I Expect You to Die, there was no touch announce, there was no Vive announce with hands. Like the only controller people would have was like a mouse or an Xbox controller at the time. And we knew that the touch controllers would be coming just because VR without touch controllers is not as good. But we were like, also we knew there was a lot of issues with movement in VR because, we had done VR experiments at like Carnegie Mellon and things like that. And so we wanted to have a seated experience. And so thinking about seated experiences where you feel awesome and smart and powerful, it's like, well, what is that? What is that like? And so, who gets into these situations where they're like tied up or in trouble, but they still get out of it? It's like, well, spies. And so we started thinking about that. Right? And so I think that's where it sort of really stemmed from. And so drawing inspiration from various times where the hero or the protagonist is trapped or in trouble, obviously James Bond, but also other spy movies, other adventure films, Indiana Jones, things where you're like, you're in a tight spot, but you're still in control because you're awesome and you can get out of it.
Was there ever one crazy left turn idea that was at one point maybe going to be in the game or at some point tossed around that just ended up getting cut?
We did tests early on with conveyor belts. Like you'd be in like a factory and you'd be on a conveyor belt, they're strapped to something, or like you're in a car and the car is on a conveyor belt and there's like crushers and things. And there were two very wrong things with that. One, again, sort of the movement depending on the person. And we wanted to make this game as, motion sensitive as, so people wouldn't get sick as possible. And so there were definitely people who, even if we went slow, sometimes worse if you went slow, sometimes worse if you went fast. It was all different with how people felt motion sickness. So we were like, well, that's not great. But then because then we were like, oh, well, what if you're in front of the conveyor belt and the conveyor belt's moving past you and you have to do things on a conveyor belt? But the problem with that is if you have timed elements and you die and you have to do it again, you have to wait for those timed elements. And it became this thing that was very frustrating. And so we quickly came to the realization that we wanted everything to be based around the player's speed and the player's actions. And we didn't want these sort of timed elements in the level. So we tried to stay away from those as much as possible. So the player could control the speed of the play. So if they wanted to go really fast, like they've done it a couple of times, or they're trying to, that's sort of where the speed runs came from. We're like, wow, because we did this thing where we wanted you to be able to get back to where you were quickly, we now realize that we could have these speed runs as these achievable goals. And, a lot of people ask us, why didn't you have checkpoints? And the reason we didn't have checkpoints is the way that the puzzles were constructed, a lot of times people would get into a spot where like there's just chaos in the level, and maybe they've covered a clue or they've thrown a clue away because they didn't realize what it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're like stuck in the puzzle. And if we saved that state as a checkpoint, they would never see that clue. And so it was important to us that you could die and you could start it over and get a fresh perspective on the level and maybe like see something you didn't see before. And so that's why we also, that's why we didn't have checkpoints, and that's why we wanted it to be quick and easy to get back to where you were. And then that had the added bonus of you feel awesome because you did all the stuff that took you a long time the first time, but the second time you do it, the third time you do it so fast, and you're like, yeah, I'm a badass spy, right? And so that all worked together to make a good experience.
So what are some of the differences between making a more like full-on story-centric based level like First Class compared to a less story-driven level like Squeaky Clean?
So you think First Class is a more story-driven level than Squeaky Clean?
Well, more of the overall story, or at least towards the end of the story.
Interesting. So again, the production of the first game, it was like we did the sort of one level and we put it up for free on Oculus Share, and it was really popular. So we're like, okay, we need to turn this into a game. And then, there's a lot of sort of budgetary concerns and scheduling concerns with the different projects going on at Shell. And, how much scope, how many resources can we put to this? And so we're like, well, let's do another 3 levels. So we'd have 4 levels. We think we can afford that. We think that would be a good experience. And we did that, and it went really well. So it's like, okay, well, let's add another level as DLC, free DLC. So at that point we had 5. And so we actually worked on 6 and 7 together. So they're a little more linked. And when we added 5, we wanted to get more characters. We wanted to try to get some more characters in there. And some more like people really liked pretending to be the window washer. So that was cool. We had a lot more understanding of what made a good level by that point. I think that's why First Class seems a little more polished and a little more story driven. And then 6 and 7 sort of went together and we created at the same time. So they're sort of more linked.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I've heard you guys talk about a few times, you had an idea of a level set in a bathroom. What would have happened in that level and why was it cut?
I think the idea was sort of fun because, you're in this position where maybe you're like a little more vulnerable, and it's like, how did I get in this bathroom? What can I do in this bathroom? How much we like the idea of like, sort of transforming the bathroom over the course of the level. There were some issues though. So for instance, in a bathroom, you expect there to be water, interact with water, and that tends to be a performance hit, right? And then, we did have liquids and pouring in glasses and things like that, but is there a sink? Can you stop up the sink? Does the sink overflow? Does the toilet overflow? Are you like pouring things from place to place? Like that's just a lot of performance heavy water stuff. And, if the payoff's not worth all that tech investment and what's going to happen there. Not to mention you also like expect towels and other cloth, which is also performance heavy, especially on mobile VR. And then there's mirrors. What do I look like? Can I see myself? Is it a bathroom without a mirror? Like that's weird.
Yeah.
Like there were just a lot of surprisingly like water, cloth, and mirrors. Like that tech lift did not seem worth the payoff. And so that's why the sort of bathroom level fell out of acceptance.
I Expect You to Die is a more primary puzzle-based game. Were there any plans to have any fights in it or anything like that? 2
things, I think. So there's a lot of games where you're just going around shooting people.
Yeah.
And we kind of wanted like, I Expect You to Die, like you'll notice we give you a gun in a bunch of levels, but the gun is never really the primary answer, right? Like, and sometimes like in the car, you can get yourself into trouble because you break the window and now you're going to die from the gas. We kind of like that motif of the gun's not the answer and violent, now there you can shoot the guy in Squeaky Clean and you hear him scream, but it's like, it's not really like pretending to be a window washer is a way more fun way to solve that, right?
Yeah.
And so there's also, of course, again, the sort of scope of having a fight. What do the people look like? We got to do animations for it. You got to fight. You don't want to feel like silly or goofy because it's like, you kind of feel really immersed in the environment. If all of a sudden you're just like punching this thing and it's not reacting well, like didn't really seem a road we wanted to go down. Now, of course, Shell Games also made Until You Fall, which is a game all about fighting, right? But it's like, that's the game, right? Sword fighting and making sword feel really good, and you're not just like waggling a sword in someone. And so I think we sort of did that. You know, Until You Fall is our fighting game. I Expect You to Die is our escape room puzzle game, and it's just like, that's what those games do well, and there's really no need to mix the two that we saw.
Even though there aren't really any major fights besides like shooting the guy in Squeaky Clean, there are still many ways to die in the game. What's your favorite in-game death, and were there any interesting cut death ideas?
Oh, that's interesting. My favorite way to die, I think my sort of my favorite, most chaotic situation, which can usually result in a death, is when the gravity is off, the gravity machine and the laser beams are going around. Because it's just it's cool because there's no gravity. There's like lasers which look cool, and you're like trying to like, you know, maybe freeze things to block the laser so you can focus on the thing, or maybe you're ducking the lasers and you're like, so yeah, I think laser death in the lodge is probably my favorite way.
Were there any cut deaths?
I think there were some. I want to say there was some electrocution deaths in the sub-level that didn't pan out because we couldn't sort of rationalize that with the amount of water that was there. And like, why wouldn't you die more often? I mean, we got crossbowed by bear. That's pretty good. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing springs to mind specifically.
What are some of the freedoms of designing in VR that you like, and some of the limitations that designing games for VR have?
I mean, the freedoms are you know, your interface is your hands, right? And so it's like, and your body, right? Like, it was funny. When we did early testing with the car level, you know, people would just sit there and get shot by the laser. And they're like, well, where's the dodge button? We're like, well, there's no dodge button. You just dodge. And, you know, one of the reasons we left that as one of the first things that kills you is we wanted people to get used to moving, right? Like, when VR was that new, like, people weren't used to moving and using their bodies. It's another reason the first thing you do in the tutorial is you lean left and right. It's like, oh, I can lean left and right. The game can sense that. It can have meaningful impact. And so that part of the tutorial is sort of getting you ready for that part in the car where the laser is going to shoot you, and the easiest way is just to dodge, and the laser goes straight past, right? And then, of course, later we ramp it up by having lasers that track you, or, you know, so we build on that mechanic to make you figure out different things. But yeah, just like the fact that the affordances of I can pick things up and I can do things with my body, I think is the most exciting part about VR. And everything is like one-to-one with real scale, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the limitations are because people are so immersed, and if they try to do something and they can't do it, that takes them out of the immersion, right? So we had to spend, you know, a lot of time on audio design, make sure that all felt well. Like, I would say that a VR game needs like 3 times the audio budget of like a screen space game, because of the sheer just amount of things you can do and expect to sound real. And, you know, we had to look at every interactable item and say, you know, this is what people expect to do with this. Can we support that? If not, we should probably cut the item, because you know, having someone try to do something and it doesn't work is way worse than maybe not having that item at all, right? And so that's sort of the biggest limitation.
What is like the overall process for creating one level of I Expect You to Die?
We would usually start with sort of a big, you know, team-wide brainstorm. Everybody gets their ideas out, like, and we had a lot of criteria. We had a spreadsheet, right? And some of the things were like just the inherent interestingness of the space. And like, does that feel like a cool place to be? And then there's like, well, how can you die in that space? Are there enough interesting deaths? Are there enough interesting interactive toys, you know, things for the person to play with and interact with? Can that space support that, right? Then there's sort of constant things like, you know, movement. Is there going to be movement? Does it need movement? Can we have movement? Is it going to make people sick? How do we telegraph to players their main goal? And then how do we telegraph to players their sort of midterm goals, right? Because you always have, you know, drive the car out of the plane, you know, stop the virus. You have sort of these meta goals, you know, the big goals that you're working toward. And how does the environment showcase that goal? And is it clear enough? And then if that's clear enough, well, are the sort of midterm goals, how can they be clear enough? Because each midterm goal then has immediate goals, right? And so like sort of making sure that the environment has all of those available. We had some ideas for environments that it's like, well, the whole thing's going to like transform into your end goal. And it's like, is that, are people going to be super confused when that happens? Are they going to know that's going to happen? And we do a bit of that. Like we have the whole, like, you're supposed to neutralize the virus, but then it's like, okay, now the virus is going to launch and you're like doing this all off to the side.
Yeah.
And so that's like the world changing, but your goal is still really to neutralize the virus, right? Like that goal hasn't changed. And so I think there's, that's sort of, that through line is still there. But yeah, just, we had these criteria and everybody would vote and we'd like talk about the pros and the cons and we'd run the equations and then we'd sort of work on the level.
Sorry to pop in here, but I need to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can use the link in the description to head on over to their website. Let's get back into the interview. What was the most difficult puzzle or level to design?
I think maybe Squeaky Clean, because there was a lot of, is this too fiddly? Is there too much reading? Like, do I need to like, is reading the element chart, is that going to be fun? Is that going to or is that just going to be like, are people going to miss that? Or and getting that sort of balance between, sort of solving the puzzle of the chemical machine versus the puzzle of the overall room, and like, making sure that it was clear to people that like, oh, I can make with this machine, I can make useful things for some of the things that are blocking me in the environment, and just sort of making sure that connection was clear enough to players. That was probably the hardest one.
Many games have easy modes, hard modes, but I Expect You to Die only has one mode. How did you gauge how difficult you should make the puzzles so that most players would be able to complete it?
Yes, that is that's a huge question for any puzzle game, right? Because if a puzzle's too hard and it's frustrating, the players are just going to quit. Maybe they care enough to like go online and find a thing, but a lot of them are just going to quit, and that sucks. And if you make them too easy, well, then it's just like, it's too easy, it's too quick. So things that we would do, we wanted to always make sure that there were sort of multiple roadblocks that you could be working on at a time. And so if you felt really blocked by one, well, maybe I'll work on this other thing. And that does a couple things. One, it gives you a little bit of freedom to work on, what you want. And of course, if you're blocked on one, you can work on the other. So that's just good. However, it has the added bonus that, well, when you complete one of the roadblocks, that can have a hint that'll help you with the other roadblock. So for instance, in the lodge, you find stuff in the safe that can help you with the painting. You find stuff in the painting that can help you with the safe. If you get all the way to the gravity machine and you haven't found the crystals, when the gravity turns off, all the books float except for the one that opens the crystal thing. Like that, all that is on purpose. Like we always wanted to make sure that there was a clue at the end of one solution that would help you with maybe, and if you've done the other solution, great. You didn't need the clue, but it's still there and it doesn't hurt that it's there, right? So it was sort of a built-in, subtle hint system that we wanted to have in there. But yeah, lots of play testing. I mean, we would play test with people every week or, maybe every other week because we had 2-week sprints. But yeah, we would play test a lot, a lot. And, one of the sort of big ahas that I took away from I Expect You to Die was sort of standardizing playtest questions and tracking results over time. That's something I've used in every project since then, because that was key.
How did you guys come up with Dr. Zor as the villain? Is there anything behind that or just random idea?
There were a lot of different villains proposed. And there was also talk of like, well, is each level going to be a different villain? And that seemed like too much. And we liked the idea of sort of seeing the different facets of this guy's evil corporation and how do those different pieces fit together. I think it definitely evolved over the course of the game. Yeah, I can't remember the exact origination of Dr. Zor.
What were some of the other villains brought up?
There are a lot of villains based on puns that were maybe a little too silly or too over the top, and some of them either morphed into different ones, or like I know, like when they were working on the level with the beekeeper, the bees. I think that was like, it was just such a ridiculous idea that these bees would be attacking you. I don't know. We just sort of fell in love with that. But yeah, no, I think, again, I can't really remember any specific ones. That there was a I want to say it was like a baker. It was the underbaker. I think the underbaker didn't get in. Yeah, that was one that didn't get in.
What was your toughest story problem, and how did you deal with it?
Sort of like, because of this sort of haphazard nature of the way that we made the missions, how they weren't like all made at the same time. We were sort of like, we did the one, and then we did the next three, and then we did one, and then we did two. So I think it's like sort of making sure that there were callbacks to either previous missions, or sometimes sort of trying to find pieces of earlier missions that we could sort of retroactively fit into future missions, so it had more of a cohesive feel. That was a tough thing, and we semi-succeeded. I think we could have done a better job, but it was a little hard because of the way they were made. So yeah, I think having the connections to the missions was probably the hardest part.
When you're creating new puzzles, where do you turn for inspiration when making a new puzzle?
We would oftentimes start with, okay, this is this environment. What is a fun, interactive thing we can have in it? And then how do we make puzzles around it? So First Class, for instance, right? We wanted you to feel like there were other people on the train with you and you'd be able to interact with them. And, well, how do we do that without having you move or having, people physically moving around? That's all, back to the scope of the actors and animations. And we'll like, well, you could have a phone that could like talk to other rooms and maybe get clues from that. Okay, well, what does a phone mean? Does the phone just work? Do you have to like fix the phone? Can you hack the phone? Ooh, what does hacking the phone mean? Like, and then it was like, well, how do you interact with them? Like, and it's like, I've always loved sort of banks and, some places like Home Depot always have those pneumatic tubes. And it's like, maybe we can get a pneumatic tube system in there. Yeah. What would that be like? You could like send and receive things. People could send you bombs. Ooh, yeah, well, that'd be cool. Like, so like sort of like taking the environment and like, a lot of the First Class gameplay stemmed from the fact that we wanted you to feel like you weren't alone on the train. And how could we have you interacting in interesting ways? And part of that was like, oh, there could be like, there's agents trying to kill you, but there's also agents trying to help you. And so that's how that whole like thing sort of stemmed from that. So it all grew sort of organically. Those puzzles, it's really, yeah, I'm really proud of First Class. That's probably my favorite level. Out of the Lodge. The one thing I wish we'd done in First Class, I'll tell you the thing I wish we'd done. So we always made sure that you could, like I said before, go fast through the level to either get back to where you were or just to feel awesome or to do the speed run. And if the fastest way to do that level is just not even to bother with the earpieces, because once you don't even have to bother with either of the earpieces. And I wish that we had, it was toward the end of development and we just ran out of time. We knew that it was kind of annoying that you had to wait the time while the people were talking before the next thing would happen. So I wish it was just too late. We couldn't go back and it would cause too much redo of the QA and testing. But I wish we had gotten to, if you don't have the earpieces in, we don't wait that period of time. So then you could have had a much faster speed run. Okay. And it would have been more cool. But yeah, I don't know. It's fine. It's fine.
What was your biggest production/design challenge that you had to deal with while working on I Expect You to Die?
I think it was probably, getting the sort of the other characters making it feel like you weren't alone in the world and having the other characters have meaningful interactions with you without ever really seeing them. I think that was probably the most design and technical, because we wanted you to feel like you weren't alone, but we also didn't have the budget to do like full blown characters and stuff. So
How did you make it so that the player doesn't feel so alone in the world?
I mean, so we were able to come up with interesting interactions that could basically be done with primarily voiceover VO, and then them affecting your environment in some way, right? So we have the woman on the space station, we have the people in the train cars, we have people in the elevator, in the boardroom, right? So there's different ways that we made it feel like you weren't alone, even though you never actually really saw anyone.
Was there ever anything you disagreed about with another designer or with the studio that you ended up fighting about to try and get into the game or get taken out of the game?
There were small things again, it would have been nice to have a little more time to go back and change it so it doesn't have that delay, but it sort of that opportunity, we had to get the game done, right? That's the thing, right? You never really finish a game. You just run out of time or money, and sometimes you run out of both. But yeah, no, I think not really. I mean, just small things like that. I wish we'd managed to get the lighter to be able to flick open with a gesture, but by that point we were still supporting mouse controls, we were supporting Xbox controller, we were supporting PSVR, touch, Vive, so many different controls to get that working with all of them. And because it would never basically work with the Xbox controller, it just didn't make sense. And so there's little things that would have had a much bigger lift to get working on all the control schemes that just didn't get in. Things like that, I think. But
what is your least favorite level, if you have one?
Least favorite? Gosh, I don't know. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. I don't really know if I have a least favorite, to be perfectly honest. Maybe Squeaky Clean. I don't know if I'd go back and just play that one again for fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Even that one, I love parts of that. I love the surprise of the rocket coming out. I love that people panic and try to go fast.
Yeah.
They don't really need to. It's actually all based on when every time you dismantle the rocket is when the countdown gets faster. So you can actually just chill there and nothing would ever happen. But people get so worried, it's kind of fun. But yeah, that's probably the one that if I just had to jump back in and play one for fun, it probably wouldn't be that one.
Now looking back at it a bit later, is there anything you wish you could have done differently?
I think we did a fairly good job of making it a game that people can introduce people to VR with, right? And I think that's a really strong point of it, or a strong asset of that game. I think to aid that even further, I think I watched parts of the sort of tutorial, right? Sitting in the office and learning things. I wish that we had actually had, and again, this sort of goes to scope, right? But imagine it said, it says press the A button or whatever, right? And on the screen, we show an image where the A button is. But I would love to have had, the controller in your hand with the A button highlighted. But think about that, right? To do that for every, there was 6 or 7 different control schemes, right? You've got mouse, Xbox controller, touch, Vive, Windows Media, or the Windows VR, the PSVR. We would have had to have so many different versions, physical now, 3D, not just an image. It was bad enough having to make images for all those tutorials, right? Scope-wise. And now we'd have to also do it 3D asset-wise and texture-wise and all that stuff. It just was But I think that would have helped people who are really new to VR, to be able to look at their hand and see, oh, that's the button I should press. And then once they do it, that sort of fades out and it's back to just the glove. But, scope, time, money.
Mm-hmm. What was the biggest lesson you learned from I Expect You to Die?
I think going back to the playtesting, I think standardizing playtesting questions and tracking results over time, that's been useful in every project since. So I think that's because we did a lot of playtesting. You have to do a lot of and when I say playtesting, I mean you have someone who knows nothing about the game play the game, and try to give them as little information as possible and just let the game play, right? And so for a screen space game, you have to do a lot of playtesting. for a VR game, because it was so new, and even to this day, it's still new to people, right? You have to just do so much more and see what people expect to do. And so, yeah, sort of standardizing those questions, tracking that over time. So that's the biggest takeaway.
So what are you working on now? What's next for you?
Yeah. Well, Shell Games, we always got stuff going on. Got a couple of VR projects going on right now, and I'm working on those. And it's going to be good. I don't know. I can't really say more than that. But
are you involved at all with the sequel to I Expect You to Die, which I think is coming out later this year? Is there anything you could tell us about that?
It is coming out later this year. I can tell you that. I was actually not that involved. I definitely did a lot of play testing. You know, the team working on it is an awesome team, super talented. I'm super excited. But no, I didn't actually. We got some fresh blood in there. I think it's good. They did a lot of cool things. But yeah, no, I just got to enjoy it and just got to play it, which is nice. Awesome. No spoilers for me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time and have a great rest of your day.
And it's been great talking to you, man.
And that's how the interview went down. If you think I Expect You to Die sounds like a really cool game, well, you're right. I Expect You to Die will be on sale leading up into the launch of their second game, I Expect You to Die, The Spy and the Liar. So it's the perfect time to hone your secret agent skills before the launch of the second game. If you want to get 20% off your next order from Hoffman's Woodstuffs, make sure to use code GDH20 at checkout. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can find their website using the link below. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.